Each year, approximately 400,000 people die from the use of tobacco. Tobacco has within it a very powerful and addictive drug known as nicotine. The addictiveness of nicotine is often compared to that of heroin. When tobacco is smoked, nicotine is absorbed into a person's lungs. This drug is then carried through the smoker's bloodstream and travels to their brain. In the brain, there are specific nicotine neuroreceptors. Once activated, these nicotine neuroreceptors produce a neurotransmitter known as dopamine, which triggers a reward response in the brain and gives the nicotine user a feeling of well-being. Nicotine is also a stimulant. It makes the user feel more alert and enhances their cognitive abilities. Some nicotine users also feel better able to cope with feelings of anxiety. Unfortunately, smoking tobacco introduces the user to a variety of cancer-causing chemicals, including carbon monoxide, ammonia, arsenic, and acetone, among many others. One alternative to smoking tobacco is smokeless tobacco. The user places a wad of smokeless tobacco in their mouth, tucked between their cheek and gums. There, it introduces nicotine into the user's bloodstream through their mucous membranes. It then travels to their brain, activating the nicotine neuroreceptors, which then creates dopamine. Smokeless tobacco may appear to be a safe alternative to smoking tobacco, but unfortunately, many users of this product develop various types of cancer. These include cancer of the mouth, gums, lips, cheeks, throat, and/or jaw. Two famous cases involving professional athletes who used smokeless tobacco and later contracted oral cancer include Tony Gwynn, a former Major League Baseball player, and Jim Kelly, a former National Football League quarterback. Unfortunately, Tony Gwynn has since died of cancer, and Jim Kelly has gone through several radical surgeries to attempt to remove cancerous lesions from his jaw. To make nicotine use safer, a variety of new nicotine delivery systems have been developed. The developers of some of these nicotine delivery systems claim that they may help smokers to quit. One of these nicotine delivery systems is known as a vaporizer. This device works by superheating a liquid nicotine solution until it reaches a temperature high enough to vaporize. This nicotine-infused vapor is then inhaled, much like a traditional cigarette when it is smoked. The makers of these vaping devices claim that they are safer than smoking tobacco because they emit fewer cancer-causing chemicals. Research is currently being conducted to test whether this claim is in fact true. Recently, vaping has come under fire and is being closely scrutinized because hundreds of people who vape have become seriously ill with severe lung injuries. Some of them have even died. Health officials have had some difficulty in identifying exactly what it was that was causing these damaging respiratory reactions and severe lung injuries. What is known thus far is that vaping nicotine and THC products have both been linked to these serious lung injuries. One theory, and even some scientific evidence, has pointed to vitamin E acetate as the main culprit. This chemical is used to dilute THC products, making them more profitable to sell. Until a more definitive information is discovered about the origin of these vaping illnesses and what exactly is causing them, those who vape are being cautioned to either stop altogether or at least stop using any illicit vaping products such nicotine and THC. One potential problem with vaping may be a chemical that is often used in liquid nicotine vaping solutions. This chemical is known as glycol. Glycol is used as an additive in both antifreeze and in food. Glycol is considered safe to ingest as a food additive, but some question whether it's safe to inhale as a vapor. The long-term health conse- the long-term health effects of vaping are still being researched, and it will likely take many years before we are definitively know whether vaping nicotine is really any safer than smoking tobacco. The long-term health effects of using vaping products is still under investigation. Only with the passing of time will more definitive information be forthcoming. Both tobacco and smokeless tobacco have been found to be extremely dangerous to one's health. So even though the debate is on whether vaping is safer than smoking still rages, it is probably best not to use any nicotine products if you wish to avoid any serious long-term health issues. Vaporizers and our youth. One of society's biggest problems today is the explosive increase in the use of vaporizers by teenagers. The use of vaporizers has increased exponentially among middle and high school students. One vaporizer that is very popular among them is known as the Juul. What makes the Juul so notorious is that it is small, easily concealable, and emits a very high level of nicotine. This means that the children who use this vaping device tend to become addicted to nicotine rather quickly. This also means that we are witnessing the rise of a whole new generation of nicotine addicts. The sad fact is that these children are, in effect, experimental subjects to see whether there are any long-term negative health effects from vaping nicotine. In addition, many of those who become addicted to nicotine using a vaporizer may also end up using other forms of tobacco. The IQOS device, perhaps a safer alternative to smoking tobacco. Another smoking alternative that has recently been approved by the FDA is a device known as the Tobacco Heating System, or simply the IQOS. This device was developed by Philip Morris, the makers of Marlboro cigarettes. The IQOS is being marketed as a safer alternative to smoking tobacco. It offers nicotine users a new method of introducing nicotine into their bloodstreams. When ignited, a cigarette can reach temperatures of more than 600 degrees Celsius. The makers of the IQOS claim that the tobacco used in this device is safer to inhale because it's only heated to around 350 degrees Celsius. Because of this lower temperature, the IQOS is said to produce much fewer cancer-causing chemicals than traditional cigarettes. The IQOS is a battery-operated, handheld device in which the user places a small amount of specifically designed tobacco. Once this tobacco is loaded into the IQOS, it is heated until it begins to give off a vapor, which is then inhaled. The research has shown that the IQOS releases far fewer chemicals than smoking traditional tobacco, and therefore, theoretically, it should be safer than smoking. Philip Morris predicts that one day most smokers will replace their cigarettes with the IQOS device. There are currently 7.3 million people around the globe using the IQOS. This number is expected to increase exponentially once the IQOS becomes more widely available, and Philip Morris has had a chance to market the device on a larger scale. If the IQOS does prove to be a safer alternative to smoking, then it may become the primary way that most smokers will get their nicotine fix. Anti-smoking campaigns. In the attempt to reduce tobacco use, our society has placed a special separate tax on all nicotine products. These taxes, along with a public outcry against tobacco use, have significantly reduced the number of smokers. A portion of these nicotine taxes are used to pay for anti-smoking ads being run on radio and television. This advertising is specifically designed to vilify smokers, making them pariahs in the eyes of society. This calls into question whether using nicotine tax revenues in this way is appropriate. Some cities have even begun banning the sale of tobacco products and outlaw their use in public places. Chapter 2: A plan designed to reduce and eventually end the use of nicotine. Before discussing this plan in detail, let us first examine some of the issues surrounding nicotine use. First off, it's probably safe to assume that if nicotine continues to be legal and readily available, then a certain number of people will continue to use this drug. It seems that the goal of having a nicotine-free society may be admirable, but how do we go about achieving this goal without infringing on the rights of those who choose to use this drug? Now, is there a way in which both the people who use nicotine and those who do not can live in harmony, while at the same time keeping future generations from becoming addicted to this drug? There may be a way that we can protect both the rights of nicotine users as well as greatly reduce the number of people who begin using this powerfully addictive drug. In the next chapter, a plan will be presented that offers those who use nicotine a way to continue to use it legally while making it virtually impossible for those who do not use nicotine to obtain this drug. This plan will not deprive law-abiding citizens of their right to use this drug legally, while at the same time it will greatly reduce the number of future nicotine users. This plan has been designed to drastically reduce the number of people who use nicotine. The key to ending nicotine use is to prevent people from ever getting started, and the plan is designed to do just that. This plan will be explained more in depth in the coming chapters, where we will examine the details of this novel approach to nicotine cessation. The goal of this plan. The goal of this plan is to save the lives of 400,000 people each year. One way to achieve this goal is by allowing the users of nicotine to continue to use this drug until they eventually die, or they decide to quit of their own free will. This plan is quite simple and it could be implemented immediately. Two-tier system. This plan creates a two-tier system. The first tier is made up of nicotine users who will still be allowed to purchase and use this drug legally. The second tier is made up of people who do not use nicotine and will not be allowed access to this drug unless they are of legal age and agree to go through a thorough screening process to receive a nicotine user's identification card. Nicotine identification cards. All nicotine users who wish to continue to purchase and use this drug legally will be required to go through a thorough screening process to see if they are qualified to receive a nicotine user's identification card. This identification card will be required for the legal purchase of all nicotine products. In other words, to legally purchase and use nicotine, all users will need to have a nicotine user's identification card. This identification card will be used each time a nicotine user purchases any nicotine product. The nicotine user's identification card application process. For a nicotine user to receive a nicotine user's identification card, they must first fill out an application in which they will need to provide some sort of official identification. This could be a driver's license, state identification, or a passport. They'll also need to prove that they are of legal age to use nicotine products in the state in which they reside. After the nicotine user has filled out the appropriate paperwork and provided the proper identification, they will then be photographed. This photograph will be embedded into their identification card. This nicotine user identification card will include their name, address, date of birth, hair color, eye color, and height. In other words, this card will have a photo and other identifying information on it so that the nicotine user can easily be identified when they present their card at the point of purchase. Nicotine users will need to present their identification card each time they purchase a nicotine product. These identification cards will be like a state identification card or a driver's license. They'll also be like a credit card in that they will have a magnetic strip and an electronic chip embedded in them. The reason for having an embedded magnetic strip and chip will be explained further and more in depth in the next section. Introducing the Nicotine Access Card, the NAC. These nicotine user identification cards will be known as Nicotine Access Cards, NAC. Only those in legal possession of a NAC identification card will be allowed to purchase and use nicotine products. A new system will be developed that will oversee the NAC identification card application process. The system will be able to efficiently process and issue these new NAC identification cards to the 50 million users of nicotine. There'll be a grace period before these NAC identification cards will be required for the purchase of nicotine products. This is so that there'll be enough time for every nicotine user to apply for and receive their NAC identification card. Once this grace period ends, every nicotine user will be required by law to have an NAC identification card to purchase and use nicotine products. Each person applying for an NAC identification card will be required to pay a one-time fee of $25. This fee will cover all expenses associated with the application process and the production of these cards. It may be prudent to have each state's Department of Motor Vehicles oversee the application and screening process, as well as produce these NAC identification cards. This is because most DMV offices have been designed and are already staffed to handle large numbers of applications for driver's licenses and state identification cards, which means they also have the capability and capacity to produce a large number of these NAC identification cards quickly and efficiently. Now, if it is found that the state's DMVs are incapable or unwilling to handle this extra work, a new agency would then be put in place and charged with processing the applications and producing these NAC identification cards. For those who have not gone through the formal application process to receive their NAC identification card before the grace period ends, they'll need to apply for one through the mail. They'll need to mail in proof of their identity along with current photo and pay $25 application fee before they'll be processed into the NAC system and receive their NAC identification card. As mentioned previously, each of these NAC identification cards will have a magnetic strip and electronic chip embedded in them. At the point of purchase, the nicotine user will either slide their NAC identification card through a card reader so that the magnetic strip can be read, or it can be slid into the card reader so the embedded chip can be read by the device. The card reader will then scan the card and record all the relevant information embedded in it, and then send this information to a cloud computer data collection system. The record of the transaction will include description of each product purchased, the price paid, the amount of sales and nicotine taxes collected, the name of the person who purchased the item, what time the item was purchased, the name of the person who sold the item, and the location and name of the store that sold the item. All personal data collected will be encrypted and remain confidential. This system will record the purchase of every nicotine product sold. This data could then be utilized by researchers trying to find ways to reduce nicotine use and looking for more effective ways to quit. Those in charge of developing nicotine cessation programs could also use this data to help them design better programs for those most at risk for addiction and or early death due to nicotine use. Tracking sales of nicotine products will offer a better understanding about what type of products are being used most frequently, how many people are using them, and when they tend to purchase them. The price of the nicotine products in various locations could also be analyzed to see whether the price of each of these products affects the number of the units sold. This will allow researchers the ability to track exactly what was sold, where it was sold, and how many of the products were sold, and when each item was sold. This data will be made available in real time. Nicotine taxes. Nicotine products are taxed twice. Nicotine users pay both a nicotine tax and a state sales tax. The nicotine tax was put in place primarily to help deter people from using this drug. These nicotine taxes are also being used to help fund the budgets of various government agencies and programs. Research has shown that there tends to be a decrease in the number of nicotine users when the nicotine tax is increased substantially. This plan continues the practice of adding a nicotine tax on all nicotine products sold. This nicotine tax will be $2 per pack of cigarettes or its equivalent. This tax will not be allowed to increase. Personalized Savings Account, a PSA. When a nicotine user receives their nicotine access card, they will also automatically be given a personalized savings account, a PSA. Each time the nicotine user purchases a nicotine product and pays a nicotine tax, this tax revenue will be transferred electronically into their PSA, their personalized savings account. So, instead of the government receiving these nicotine tax revenues, they will instead be transferred into the nicotine user's personalized savings account. These funds will then be made available to help them to quit using nicotine. The savings in one's PSA, personalized savings account, will accumulate over time. For instance, let us say someone were to buy 2 packs of cigarettes each day and the nicotine tax is $2 a pack. This means that this user will pay $4 a day in nicotine taxes. If they continue to smoke for 10 years, they will have saved $14,600 in their personalized savings account. These personalized savings funds will then be made available to the nicotine users so that they'll be able to pay for all the various expenses associated with nicotine cessation if and when they choose to quit. These PSA, personalized savings account, nicotine tax revenues can be used to purchase an array of nicotine cessation products, including things such as nicotine patches, nicotine gum, nicotine lozenges, nicotine nasal spray, or any other nicotine replacement products that are currently available. Pharmaceutical medications designed to help with nicotine cessation, such as Chantix or bupropion, may also be purchased and paid for by using one's PSA funds. The manufacturers of these nicotine cessation products strongly recommend that anyone using their products should receive psychological counseling. With the PSA system in place, every nicotine user will now be able to receive high-quality psychological counseling. In other words, one's PSA funds will pay for all nicotine cessation-related costs, including counseling. Typically, most nicotine users begin using this drug in their late teens or early 20s, and many, if not most, will become addicted to it relatively quickly. Once addicted, they'll usually continue to use this drug until they either decide to quit or, as often happens, they eventually die. In most cases, the average nicotine user will continue using this drug for many years before they either decide to quit or they die. The amount of money that is spent on nicotine products over the course of a lifetime can be quite astounding. For example, someone smokes 1 pack of cigarettes per day and is paying $6 a pack. They'll be spending $42 a week. Now, if they continue to smoke for 1 year, they will have spent $2,190. If they smoke one pack of cigarettes per day for 10 years, they will have spent $21,900. Now, if the same smoker is paying $2 a day in nicotine taxes over 10 years, they will have saved $7,300 in their personalized savings account. The PSA, the personalized savings account, um, the tax revenues from the PSA will be conservatively invested in safe financial instruments such as state bonds and U.S. government-backed securities, where they will accrue interest over time. These nicotine tax revenues saved in each nicotine user's PSA will then be made available to pay for the nicotine cessation medications, nicotine replacement products, and high-quality individual and/or group counseling. Paying for psychological counseling. By far, the largest expense in attempting to quit using nicotine is the cost of receiving specialized, high-quality individual and/or group counseling. Some nicotine users may already have health insurance that will cover the cost of a limited number of counseling sessions. But unfortunately, anyone without this type of health insurance must pay the entire cost of any counseling that they receive. With this plan, the nicotine users will have funds available in their PSAs to pay for all of the counseling they will need to successfully quit. You may be wondering what happens if someone becomes addicted to nicotine after using this drug for only a short period of time and does not have enough money saved in their nicotine tax revenue accounts, their PSAs, to cover the high cost of quitting. Well, the PSA system has been designed with this scenario in mind. The PSA program is based on the insurance model. The general concept behind most insurance plans works something like this. A person decides to purchase a comprehensive insurance policy and pays a premium, which then entitles the insured to access all benefits of the insurance coverage immediately. For instance, if someone were to sign up for a comprehensive health insurance and then later that same day gets sick or hurt, the insurance would pay for all their medical expenses. This is because there's a pool of premium funds that are available to cover the cost of everyone who is insured. Another example may be someone who purchases comprehensive car insurance and then later that same day crashes their vehicle. The driver would be fully covered by the insurance policy. In other words, once insured, it does not matter whether you have paid enough in premiums to equal the payout of your claim. Everyone who uses nicotine products will automatically be paying into their individual savings accounts and investment account. The fact is that not every nicotine user will try to quit at the same time. This means that most nicotine users will not need to access their PSA funds at the exact same time. Therefore, there will always be more than enough PSA funds available to pay for anyone who wishes to quit at any time. Unfortunately, the sad fact is that most nicotine users will either be unwilling or unable to quit using this terribly addictive drug, even when the money isn't made available to pay for their treatment and counseling. Additionally, not every nicotine user will spend their entire PSA savings to quit. This means that any remaining PSA funds could then be used to help those who are addicted to this drug and wish to quit, but do not have enough savings in their PSA accounts to cover the entire cost of quitting. How this new plan works. Looking at our previous example, say someone smokes 2 packs of cigarettes per day for 10 years and pays $2 per pack in nicotine taxes. They will have saved a total of $14,600 in their PSA. Now, say this smoker attempts to quit by using nicotine patches and attending 20 counseling sessions. The patches will cost around $200 each, and the counseling session will run $150 per hour. Therefore, the cost of purchasing these nicotine patches and attending 20 counseling sessions will cost about $3,200. These costs would be paid by using some of their available funds in the smoker's personal savings account. Remember, this smoker paid $4 each day in nicotine taxes for 10 years, which means that they have $14,600 available in their PSA. So taking $3,200, the cost of counseling and patches, away from $14,600 leaves $11,400 balance. Now, if this person remains nicotine free for the rest of their life, there will still be $11,400 in PSA savings available for anyone else who may wish to quit using nicotine, but may not have enough money saved in their own PSA to pay for their entire cost of quitting. In other words, there will always be plenty of funds available to pay for any nicotine user who wishes to quit, even if some of them do not have enough PSA funds available to pay all their expenses associated with quitting. There will also be those who decide not to quit using nicotine and subsequently die without using any of their PSA savings. These unused PSA funds will also be made available to those nicotine users who wish to quit but may not have accumulated enough PSA funds to do so. This system is designed so that there will always be more than enough money set aside to cover all the costs associated with nicotine cessation for anyone who wishes to quit using this drug. There are approximately 50 million Americans using nicotine products every day, and the fact is that some nicotine users have more money than others. Therefore, charging all nicotine users the same amount of nicotine tax is a regressive form of taxation and inherently unfair. This is because no matter how much money a person earns, everyone using nicotine pays the exact same tax. Whether someone earns $1 million a year or just $12,000 a year, they both pay the same amount of nicotine taxes. Obviously, a $2 tax hurts a person earning $12,000 a year much more than someone earning $1 million per year. Taxes on nicotine products are designed primarily to discourage their use. They are put in place to financially punish anyone who uses nicotine. Research has shown that when nicotine taxes are raised, the number of people who quit increases. As a result, nicotine taxes are continually being raised higher and higher, which in turn has resulted in more people quitting. Nicotine taxes are put in place to financially coerce nicotine users to quit. We could raise taxes on nicotine products even further in the hope of encouraging more nicotine users to quit. This could be done by making nicotine products so expensive that most users would be priced out of the market. For instance, let us say that the nicotine tax on cigarettes was raised to $100 per pack. This would make smoking unaffordable for most people and basically force almost everyone to quit. Unfortunately, raising the tax on nicotine to $100 a pack would virtually also guarantee a black market would arise, one that could easily sell nicotine products at a much lower price. This black market would create a whole new class of criminals, those buying and selling nicotine products illegally. Worse yet, if society decides to keep raising the nicotine tax, those in the lowest income bracket would continue to be punished more severely. In other words, the people who can least afford to pay ridiculously high nicotine taxes are those with the least amount of money, our nation's poor. Incidentally, most nicotine users are poor. The fact remains, nicotine is a highly addictive drug, and those who have become addicted to it will do almost anything to get their fix. This also means that nicotine users will pay almost any price to get this drug, even if it means paying exorbitant taxes or buying nicotine products on the black market. Nicotine taxes are currently being used to help fund government programs and projects that have little, if any, direct benefit for the nicotine users. Some of these tax revenues are being used to pay for television and radio advertisements that work to vilify nicotine users in the eyes of society. This plan offers a fair and reasonable alternative to this present system. This plan will continue to tax nicotine at a high level, high enough to discourage most people from using this drug, but not so high as to cause extreme financial hardship to the users or encourage a black market from developing. Chapter 3: A Common Sense Approach. It is time for a common sense approach to slow down and eventually end the use of this dangerously addictive drug. This plan is fair and equitable for those who are currently addicted to nicotine as well as to those who have never used this drug. This plan provides a simple way to help our society virtually eliminate nicotine use by the year 2050. It tightly regulates nicotine and limits the sale of all nicotine products to only those with a valid NAC identification card. It also continues to tax nicotine users at a rate high enough to discourage most people from using this drug. All the nicotine tax revenue that is collected is put into each user's PSA and used to pay for the costs associated with nicotine cessation and treatment. In other words, nicotine users will still be able to legally access nicotine products for a reasonable price if they have a valid NAC identification card, and will be able to use the nicotine tax revenue saved in their PSA to help them to quit. This plan protects the rights of both the nicotine users as well as those who do not use this drug. It also helps curb the tide of children from becoming the next generation of nicotine addicts by restricting the sale of nicotine products to only those with a valid NAC identification card. At the same time, it will also educate our youth about the very serious dangers of using this drug. As mentioned previously, middle and high school students are using nicotine at an alarming rate, quickly becoming the next generation of addicts. Once addicted, they may grow tired of merely vaping and move on to using tobacco or other nicotine products. One of the goals of this plan is to make it much more difficult for anyone who is not addicted to nicotine to gain access to it. The best part of this plan is that it will not cost the taxpayers a dime because it's fully funded with the nicotine tax revenues. One might ask, what is to stop those who can legally purchase nicotine from simply selling or providing this drug to non-users? Well, there are already laws in place that will punish those who pursue this type of activity. Once again, this program is not designed to punish people for using nicotine. Instead, it tries to ensure that only those who are addicted to this drug and are of legal age will have access to it. Remember, the goal of this program is to reduce the number of nicotine users over time. Punishing nicotine users will do very little to dissuade them from using this drug or encourage them to quit. Making nicotine illegal will have unintended consequences. It will glamorize this drug and promote its use. In other words, punishing drug users by imposing fines and imprisoning them tends to create a certain mystique and works to promote and continue the use of the drug and helps to create a black market for it. This plan restricts nicotine use to only those who are already addicted to this drug. Now, restricting the sale of nicotine only to those who have obtained an NAC identification card will limit the number of potential new users by making it much more difficult for them to acquire this drug. This plan also offers those who are already addicted to this drug an opportunity to quit by providing them with all the necessary tools to help them to successfully overcome this insidious addiction for the rest of their lives. This plan offers nicotine addicts the support, compassion, empathy, and all the help they'll need to successfully end their addiction to this drug, preventing a new black market from forming. The last thing we need in this country is a new black market for addictive drugs. Putting this plan in place will help to prevent the creation of yet another black market, one focused on the sale of nicotine products. This plan puts policies and procedures in place that will greatly diminish these types of illicit activities from ever getting a foothold and becoming a reality. New laws will be drawn up that will target the illicit sale of nicotine products. Anyone who breaks these laws will be criminally prosecuted, fined, and perhaps even imprisoned. In other words, if someone sells nicotine product without a nicotine seller's license, they'll be prosecuted, receive a substantial fine, and could face imprisonment. This plan works to prevent the development of a new black market because nicotine products will still be legal, available, and affordable to anyone with an NAC identification card. In other words, if the price of nicotine products remains affordable for most users, then there will be no incentive for anyone to sell them illicitly. Minors will continue to be prime targets for illicit nicotine sales because of their age and their inability to access this drug legally. Therefore, current laws prohibiting sales of nicotine products to children will remain in effect and continue to be strictly enforced. This plan uses education, regulation, and a nicotine user's identification card system to control and restrict the sale of nicotine products. The emphasis of this plan is to encourage, educate, inspire, and help nicotine users to quit. It's not designed to punish those who use this drug. Chapter 4: Restricting the Sale of Nicotine Products. Currently, almost any store can legally sell nicotine products to anyone of legal age who wishes to purchase them. This plan restricts who may legally sell nicotine products. Only those business establishments who are licensed to sell nicotine products will be allowed to sell them legally. In addition, businesses that sell nicotine products will need to obtain a nicotine seller's license to sell these products legally. Anyone selling a nicotine product to someone without a valid NAC identification card could forfeit their nicotine seller's license. This will help ensure that only those who have the proper identification will be able to purchase these products legally. Restricting who may sell nicotine products will also help ensure that all regulations governing the sale of nicotine will be adhered to. Only those businesses that cater to nicotine users will be allowed to sell nicotine products. These nicotine sellers will be required to check the purchaser's NAC identification card before selling any nicotine products to them. To receive a license to legally sell nicotine products, sellers will be required to attend a specially designed training course and pay a licensing fee of $10,000. Charging such a high price for a nicotine seller's license should work as a major incentive for anyone selling nicotine products to restrict the sale of nicotine to only those with a legal possession of an NAC identification card. Now, if a seller breaks the law and sells nicotine products to someone without proper identification, they could lose their seller's license and their $10,000 licensing fee. This means that there will be a huge incentive for everyone who sells nicotine products to adhere to the new regulations and only sell their products to those with a valid NAC identification card. Online sales of nicotine products will be strictly prohibited. This will help to ensure that many children will not be able to gain access to any nicotine products. Pricing of nicotine products. The price of nicotine products will be allowed to fluctuate according to the free market. The goal is to keep the price of nicotine products at a level where the manufacturers and the retail sellers of these products will be able to make a decent profit and also keep the cost of these products affordable for the average user. The free market will guide nicotine sellers on how much they can charge for their products. Competition from nearby sellers should help to keep the price of nicotine products reasonably affordable. Now, if there is not enough competition among the sellers, and the price of nicotine products becomes unaffordable for most users, then a maximum profit margin will be put in place. The maximum profit margin would be somewhere between 20 and 30% above the warehouse cost of the wholesale cost of these products. The wholesale price of nicotine products will also continue to be guided by free market forces so long as there is an adequate competition among the manufacturers of these products. In other words, competition should help keep the price of wholesale tobacco low enough for the retailers to make a reasonable profit and help keep prices affordable for the average user. Free market forces work to encourage competition, and this tends to keep prices as low as possible. This free market system will remain in place until and unless the wholesale or retail markets are no longer competitive. If this occurs, the price of all nicotine products will be set, and a maximum profit level will be put in place to deter price gouging. If the price of nicotine products becomes too high and unaffordable for the average user, it will encourage the formation of a black market. Black markets tend to develop when a product is either legally unavailable or the price of the product becomes so high that it can be sold illegally for much less money. Chapter 5: The Office of Disbursement, the OD. Aside from having a system that can process and issue NAC identification cards, a separate system will be put in place that will oversee the collection and disbursement of the nicotine tax revenues. This, as mentioned previously, each nicotine user will receive a personal savings account, a PSA. So, when a nicotine user purchases a nicotine product, they will pay a $2 nicotine tax. This tax revenue will then be placed into the personalized savings account of the user. This money is then set aside to pay for all the expenses associated with them quitting. To keep track of all the nicotine tax revenue that is collected and saved in each user's PSA, a new computer software program will be developed. There will also be a new agency put in place that will oversee and guide the disbursement of these nicotine tax revenues. This new agency will be known as the Office of Disbursement, or the OD. The OD will oversee the payment of all expenses associated with nicotine cessation of the users. The OD will reimburse nicotine users for the cost of seeing a psychologist, therapist, counselor, and/or doctor. It will also reimburse nicotine users when they purchase nicotine replacement products or prescription medications. For instance, say a nicotine user wants to use a nicotine patch to help them quit. After purchasing the patches, they would then send their receipt directly to the OD for reimbursement. If they see a physician and get a prescription for a medication to help them quit, they would pay the physician and then send their bill to the OD, which would then reimburse them. After the nicotine user purchases their medication, they would then send the receipt of the medication to the OD to be reimbursed. If the nicotine user sees a psychologist, they would send their bill to the OD and be reimbursed. The OD will also oversee all of the nicotine tax revenues, PSA accounts, and keep track of all nicotine sales transactions. There will also be a set of highly trained and experienced financial experts working with the OD who will oversee the investment of the PSA funds. A small portion of the nicotine tax revenues will pay for the creation of the software program that will monitor all the nicotine sales transactions and keep track of the PSA accounts. A small portion of the funds received from the nicotine tax revenues will be used to pay for the salaries of the OD staff. There are currently about 50 million nicotine users in the United States who tend to purchase an average of 1 to 2 packs of cigarettes, or its equivalent, each day. Now, if these 50 million nicotine users are paying $2 per pack in nicotine taxes each day, that means that there will be at least $100 million in nicotine tax revenues being collected each day. The annual budget of the OD should be less than $50 million a year, and the cost to develop a software program to keep track of all the PSA accounts and nicotine tax transactions will probably cost less than $1 million. End-of-life benefits. The nicotine users' PSA funds will also be made available to help fund uh, their end-of-life expenses up to $1,000. For instance, the average cost of cremation is about $600. Therefore, a portion of the nicotine users' PSA funds could be used to pay for these cremation expenses. Now, if the nicotine user does not care to be cremated, they may choose to use a portion of their PSA funds to help pay for part of their funeral and or burial expenses up to $1,000. Every nicotine user would have $1,000 available to pay for their cremation or funeral expenses, whether they quit using nicotine or not. The primary reason for offering to help pay for a user's cremation or funeral expenses is that this may be a powerful incentive for them to think about quitting. In other words, each time the nicotine user either purchases or uses nicotine, they may come to the realization that they are placing themselves at greater risk of succumbing to an early death. The thought of paying for one's end-of-life expenses may encourage some nicotine users to think about quitting before it's too late. Chapter 6, Educational Component of this plan. This plan includes an educational component. Education is one of the most important aspects of helping to end nicotine use and addiction. This plan offers a new educational program designed for all children, starting with those as young as 5 years of age. The primary focus of this educational program is to educate our nation's youth about the many dangers of using nicotine. This plan will provide a proven, effective, evidence-based nicotine prevention program to our children. It will also work to educate nicotine users about the very serious health risks associated with using this drug. It will also inform them of the numerous opportunities that are now available to help them to quit. The funding for these educational programs will be provided using a small portion of the nicotine tax revenues. For instance, 1% of the $2 nicotine tax will be set aside to help fund these educational programs. That means that there will be approximately $360 million available each year that will help fund these programs. Chapter 7, A few innovative ideas that may help people to quit using nicotine. When nicotine patches were first developed, they were welcomed as an innovative and promising approach to smoking cessation. Nicotine patches come in 3 potency levels: 7 milligrams, 14 milligrams, and 21 milligrams. A heavy nicotine user trying to quit will usually begin by wearing a 21 milligram patch each day for approximately 2 weeks. They'll then step down to a 14 milligram patch, wearing one each day for the next 2 weeks. They will then transition to a 7 milligram patch, wearing it each day for the next and final 2 weeks. After they have worn all 3 sets of nicotine patches over the course of 6 weeks, it is presumed that the nicotine addict is ready to quit for good. The nicotine patch is a clever and innovative nicotine cessation tool, and it has helped many nicotine users end their addiction to this drug. But not everyone who uses nicotine patches is able to successfully quit using nicotine for the rest of their life. In fact, many of those who try to quit by using the patch will relapse and begin using nicotine once again. Perhaps this nicotine patch concept could be improved and redesigned to be even more effective, vastly improving the odds of being able to quit using nicotine for good. One potential flaw in the current design of the nicotine patch may be in its rapid step-down approach. Think about it. Most nicotine users have used this drug for many years, having become heavily addicted to it over a long period of time. So, the idea of quitting in merely 6 weeks may not be the most effective approach. In other words, it took the user many years to become addicted to this drug, and it may take quite some time for them to quit as well. Remember that nicotine has both addictive physical and psychological components. which must be addressed if the user is to have a chance of quitting for the rest of their life. The idea is to produce nicotine patches that are worn for a much longer period of time. For instance, instead of wearing 21 milligram patches for only 2 weeks, they'd be worn for a full month before the user steps down to the next potency level. The remaining sets of patches would also be worn for a full month as well. In other words, instead of wearing each set of patches for just 2 weeks, they'd be worn for a full month. Another suggestion is to introduce more than just 3 nicotine levels. So instead of having just 3 sets of nicotine patches, 21, 14, and 7 milligrams, there would be an additional set or a set of sets. For instance, there could be a set of 21, 18 milligrams, 15 milligrams, 13 milligrams, 10 milligrams, 8 milligrams, 5 milligrams, 2 milligrams, and even 1 milligram patches. Each set of patches would be worn for 1 month. In other words, instead of having only 3 levels of nicotine patches worn for 2 weeks, there'd be 9 levels, each being worn for a full month. In other words, these sets of patches would be worn for 9 months instead of just 6 weeks. This more drawn out process would hopefully increase the chances of nicotine user being able to quit for good. Quitting would be a much more gradual process extended over a much greater time frame. This gradual process may help the patch wearer to slowly extinguish their nicotine addiction at a pace that is slower and much steadier. The rationale for wearing nicotine patches for 9 months is that the nicotine user will become accustomed to using less and less nicotine, slowly over a much greater period. This slower approach to quitting would be very much like the way they began initially to become addicted, slowly over time. Psychological counseling. Manufacturers of nicotine patches also recommend that everyone who uses their products should also seek out professional psychological counseling to help them ensure that the user is successful in their effort to quit. This may include either individual counseling or in some form of group therapy, or perhaps both. In fact, the manufacturers of every form of nicotine replacement therapy, whether that be a patch, nicotine gum, lozenges, or nasal spray, recommends that the users of these products attain some sort of psychological counseling. By receiving counseling while also using one of these nicotine replacement products greatly improves the chances of being able to quit forever. While counseling is highly recommended by the manufacturers of every nicotine cessation product, it comes at a very high cost, especially for those who lack adequate health insurance coverage because of the high cost of counseling, most nicotine users simply cannot afford it and therefore are never able to receive it. The beauty of this plan is that it offers every nicotine user an opportunity to receive all the counseling they'll need to quit using this drug forever. Nicotine-free tobacco. Another innovative product that could help smokers to quit is nicotine-free tobacco. This tobacco would taste and smell the same as regular tobacco, but as the name implies, this product is nicotine-free. Nicotine-free tobacco could be a very useful tool for those who are attempting to quit smoking. With it, a smoker could continue to smoke while they are also using a nicotine replacement product. This means that a tobacco user could smoke nicotine-free tobacco while they're using a nicotine patch or some other nicotine replacement method. Nicotine-free tobacco could also be smoked while using either Chantix or bupropion. As mentioned previously, smoking involves addictive psychological and physical components, and therefore, smoking nicotine-free tobacco may help satisfy the addictive psychological component, while the nicotine patch will help to address the addictive physical component. While using a nicotine replacement product, the users are warned not to use any other form of nicotine. With nicotine-free tobacco, the user will be able to continue to smoke while using a nicotine replacement product. In addition, nicotine-free tobacco will not cause any biochemical or bioneurological reactions. This means that those who use nicotine-free tobacco will be able to quit using this product much easier than regular tobacco because they will no longer be getting any sort of nicotine rush. The nicotine pill. Another innovative product that could be developed to help nicotine users overcome their addiction is a nicotine pill. In other words, a pharmaceutical company could develop a nicotine pill that would quell a nicotine user's urge to use this drug by activating the brain's nicotine neuroreceptors. These nicotine neuroreceptors are literally turned on when the nicotine has been introduced to the brain. The nicotine pill would activate these nicotine neuroreceptors. Once these nicotine neuroreceptors are activated, the nicotine user would no longer feel the cravings to use this drug or have any withdrawal symptoms. These nicotine pills could be produced in various potencies. This means that one could slowly reduce their nicotine level over time. In other words, the nicotine user would step down the potency level of the pills over the course of several weeks, months, or perhaps even years, eventually becoming nicotine free. Easing off nicotine slowly should make quitting easier. These nicotine pills could be used in place of the nicotine patch or in other forms of nicotine replacement therapy. They could also be used in place of Chantix and bupropion. These nicotine pills could also be made with an extended release formula so that the user would only have to take one pill in a day. Alternatively, they could also be designed to act quickly so that they can be taken whenever they are needed. Nicotine pills could also be taken while smoking nicotine-free tobacco. This way, the nicotine user would still be able to smoke while their nicotine neuroreceptors are being activated with the nicotine pill. Conclusion. This plan is designed to greatly reduce the number of nicotine users over a relatively short time. This will be accomplished by limiting those who may purchase nicotine. The Nicotine Access Card limits who may legally purchase and use this drug. A personalized savings account is provided to all nicotine users with a NAC identification card. The combination of having a NAC identification card and a PSA account will work to limit the number of nicotine users and provide them with all the funds they'll need to quit. Every nicotine user will also receive $1,000 to help pay for a portion of their end-of-life expenses. In addition, a percent of the nicotine tax revenues would be set aside to provide an evidence-based educational program designed to teach our nation's youth about the dangers of using nicotine. Thank you.